February 9th. It's hereby called to order. Would you please call the roll?
Ms. Pierce? All right. Ms.
Yes.
Pierce? Here. Ms. Sheffers? Mrs. Dineno?
Present.
Ms. Jones? Mr. Holton?
Here.
Mrs. Brick?
Here.
Mr. Yem?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Lanier? Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mr. Cunningham?
Here.
Mr. Thomas?
Here.
And Mr. Giuliano?
Here. Thank you. All right, the next thing on the agenda is public comment. Anybody wish to say something from the audience? Seeing as how there's no comment, you have a comment?
I do not.
Okay. The item for discussion, we're going to have a presentation by Mr. Dana Little of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. It's your floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Dana Little. I am the Urban Design Director for Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. And it's good to be back in Vero Beach. I was just telling Mr. Yem that I'll be here tomorrow and next Wednesday as well for the Cultural Arts Village, which is a process that we were fortunate enough to work with the city on. If it's okay, because there were some technological issues, I've got a PowerPoint projecting on the wall, but if it's okay, I was going to dim the lights so that we can see, if that's all right with everybody.
It's pretty good.
Is that all right? Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much for having me. Back in, I think it was December 29th, Mr. Yem and Mr. Giuliano came to visit my boss, Mike Bush, and myself and Stuart. And we talked about the power plant project and, you know, the process that Treasure Coast uses, the process that we most recently wrapped up with the Cultural Arts Village, which started on September 12th. We had a week-long charrette planning process that I think was very successful. It got a lot of we got a lot of public input. So at the time that we met in December back in Stuart, we gave this brief presentation to Mr. Yem and Mr. Giuliano. So the idea today is just to go through that. This is actually a presentation of a project that we just wrapped up our charrette last Friday. So with no further ado, I'm going to walk you through this. This is going to give you a flavor of the process that we were talking to the two gentlemen about, the charrette process, relative to a project in Palm Beach County in North Palm Beach. So Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, we've been around since the 70s, and we've had an urban design studio for over 20 years. And today there's 10 regional planning councils throughout the state. There were 11. And we are the only one that actually has an urban design studio that provides these type of technical planning assistance through to local governments for planning and urban design. The project in North Palm Beach that we just finished a charrette on was a multi-agency process. In fact, I think that something that you would probably endeavor here with the port would be a multi-agency process as well. In this case, it was Florida Department of Transportation, the Village of North Palm Beach, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or it's the Metropolitan Planning Organization here. It's the TPO, I think, in St. Lucie County. They were actually not only a participating agency, but a funding agency as well for this effort. Palm Beach County, and of course ourselves in South Water Management District. But you know, the real stars of this whole effort is the community, and getting the public out and getting them engaged in the discussion and being authors of a plan going forward. I already mentioned us a little bit, but you know, within our 4-county region, which is Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie, and Indian River, there's 50 municipalities that we have been fortunate enough to provide this type of service to over the years. So you know, we've got a long legacy here in the region, or in the Treasure Coast region. The particular objectives for this project in North Palm Beach had to do with improving the quality of life, mobility. This is a town that had never had really a master plan. It was developed in the 50s by John D. MacArthur, who had purchased 2,000 acres of land, and basically it was incorporated, I think, in 59. So they had been, you know, really doing pretty well over the years, but, you know, their buildings are getting older. Things have changed in their area of the county. So they were really looking for a plan that would help them make some decisions going forward as buildings needed to be redeveloped. What is the vision of the area that the community held? As we said, anecdotally, if I were to go into the village of North Palm Beach today and as a developer say, I want to invest on the US 1 corridor, what's your vision for the corridor? There's no answer to that question in this town today, in North Palm Beach. So that's really what we were striving for. And ultimately, by grounding, the planning decisions in economic development and economic strategies, the chance of these recommendations reaching fruition are greater. Just so you know, this is the study area. This is, if you know Palm Beach Gardens, it's immediately south of Palm Beach Gardens. There's US 1 and North Lake Boulevard. And this town was actually carved basically out of the uplands there in the 50s. And there's nearly 30 miles of waterfront throughout the town. They've got this old US 1 corridor, which has almost 500,000 square feet of office space, buildings that were built in the 60s and 70s and early 80s that are right now at about 40% vacancy. And the reason for that is because there's about 3 million square feet of office space on the PGA corridor to the north and a few million square feet on the other corridor to the south. So, as the county grew up around this old village, their dynamics have changed, and so they need to figure out, what is the next iteration? What's the next generation of their town going to look like?
Dana, excuse me a minute. Tammy, is the television working? Part of it? They're not going to be able to pick this up.
No, he won't be able to get that.
But anybody that wants to see this, it's on the web?
It's on the website.
Okay, I just wanted to mention
We
that.
have copies
Okay.
in our office, too.
Okay, excuse me.
And again, this presentation is not tailored to the power plant, but it's to give you an idea of what engenders a city to want to engage in this process and what the process is. US 1 is their front door, and unfortunately for a little village of 12,000 people, which is really a beautiful place, US 1 looks like US 1 anywhere else in the region. It's a big 6-laner. It's got big 6 lanes, yeah. And actually, the first thing that we noticed when we were there is that, it's over-engineered. The roadway just to the north of town, US 1 is 4 lanes, and just to the south of town is 4 lanes. And this 6-lane road has a capacity of nearly 60,000 cars a day. And their projections out to 2040 for daily trips is only 27,000. So they're double the capacity they need. So that was a big conversation that we had over the course of the last week on the charrette. You have an opportunity, and trust me, there are those in the village who are steadfastly against reducing the number of lanes because it's counterintuitive, They've got a lot of bridges there, and many residents are suffering from congestion around the bridges, and so, gee whiz, taking any lanes away is just going to make matters worse. So, part of our job was to just educate on how this whole transportation stuff works and provide them with the data and the analysis so that the village themselves can make their own decision. Not every village, not every town is going to want to, everybody has their own ideas about who they are and what they want to be. Here I am repeating myself. This is what it looks like just north of town. This is what it looks like in the middle of town with 6 lanes, and then this is, although it's not any prettier, it's a smaller number of lanes. So, this is a big idea. If your front door is US 1 and you have an opportunity to maybe use some of that asphalt for other things, like in their case, bike lanes or landscaping, or in some cases on-street parking, that's something that they could also choose to do. This is very interesting. There's a river that runs in. Depending upon who you talk to, it's either the Ehrman River or it's the C-17 drainage canal. The Water Management District calls it the C-17 drainage canal, and the residents call it the Ehrman River. But it's actually quite beautiful. It's quite wide. It just is to the north of North Lake Boulevard right there. But what they've found over the years, because there's no plan in place and they're not recruiting any particular type of redevelopment, this beautiful river has a whole series of parking lots and dumpsters in the back of buildings and things like that that have been sort of grown up along the river's edge. So this was another key issue for discussion. As some of these buildings grow, as they sort of reach the end of their lifespan, the buildings, what's going to replace them, and what are some of the uses? And almost everybody felt that the river should. I think everybody in the process actually felt that the river should be addressed in the sense that it shouldn't be the backside of buildings. The question is how intense or what sort of use should go there. Yes, sir.
What's the depth of the river?
I don't know. There's sizable vessels that are on the river. The issue, though, here, I don't know the actual depth. I know that the river going a little bit further north, there's boats in the range of 40 to 60 feet. I mean, it's big.
Wow.
The issue here is the bridge right to the right. That's the limiting factor for this waterway. Right now, there's only a clearance at low tide of about 6.5, 7 feet. Now, to the north of town, they've got a drawbridge, which allows all these larger vessels, sailboats, et cetera, to get out. One big idea that came up is, well, what if we, in the future, when this bridge has to be rebuilt, what if we were to tunnel underneath? Which is exorbitantly expensive. But when you consider the value added of free-flowing vessels of all sizes is now amortized throughout the entire community, it starts to make some sense. So that's another discussion that's occurring. But what is the future? I mean, is the idea that it's going to be more low scale, something more upscale with restaurants and things, or maybe some combination? And then what was fortuitous for us in this process is that the village has a very tired old zoning code. Should I turn these lights out, or did
They just came on by
I don't know
themselves.
where they came
The
from.
road is right there. We don't need.
We don't need the spotlights up
No.
there. Though.
No.
do we know how to turn them off?
We don't know how they came on.
So anyway, one of the good things is that the village's zoning code right now is antiquated. So much so that it's a real impediment for redevelopment. So the timing of this was great because any of these type of redevelopment recommendations that are made, we can sort of modify the land development regulations to support them. So that's another parallel effort that's happening. They've got a lot of infill opportunities. Some of these properties have been vacant for 15 or 20 years, which is really surprising considering that the average income in this area, the average household income is nearly $50,000. And there's a tremendous amount of affluence in this area. But this combination of things, the energy that's happening around them, the old code, the fact that there's no vision, it's just nothing's really changed over time. So there's lots of redevelopment opportunities. A couple new projects have come in. This one is on the other side of that bridge, so they've got larger vessel access. This is a new waterfront restaurant, and it's got docks so you can pull up on your boat. It's been very successful. On the other side of the waterway from this is a 1970s IHOP. It's about ready to collapse from its own boredom. So, that's another redevelopment opportunity. So the point of the plan, working with the community, is to identify all these opportunities and figure out ways to get them to happen. Now, one of the components of our team for this particular project is we had a team of economists, a fellow from Washington, D.C. named Tom Lavash, and a retail expert from Detroit named Robert Gibbs. And they developed a market analysis that sort of examined, okay, what's the current DNA of this place? What are the demographics? What's the spending power? What are some of the drivers that could, the drivers that, for the demand for economic growth? Sorry, it's cut off a little bit here. So this image on the lower right here is very interesting. It's called a leakage analysis. So one of the things that our economists do is they look at, okay, what's the local economy? What's a snapshot of the local economy? What's the spending power? And then how many dollars are leaving the village in terms of retail or restaurant sales? What we discovered in the village of North Palm Beach, $118 million in annual retail sales alone are leaving the village. Now, that's not a big surprise considering there's about 3 million square feet of world-class retail just 2 miles, to the northwest of them. But what it suggests is that there's enough spending power there that while you won't compete with that corridor, PGA corridor, you do have some leverage to actually craft your own local retail center if that's what you desire. Were you asking a question? Oh, I'm sorry. We also tested the market for, what else is supportable. There's virtually no market in this place for office space. Yet they've got 400,000 square feet of office space on their corridor. There's a pretty strong pent-up demand for housing. There's been, I don't have the numbers with me, but I think that over the last 10 years, there's been a growth of 2 housing units per year in the last 10 years, because it's for the most part built out. Now, they've got 2 new big towers that are going up, which everybody's a little queasy about, but they were sold out very quickly. So all the indications are that they could reinvent this corridor that was an office corridor as a mixed-use residential corridor, and that might be something that could be supportable. So the economists help us keep from making, as planners and architects, from making too many silly decisions and keep us grounded, in some of the economic realities. Now, the process itself, we call this a charrette. I can give you the historical background in that. It means cart in French, and in the 19th century, at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, one of the first architecture schools on the planet, really, the students would work so intently on their projects, and a cart would be pushed around to pick them all up. So they'd run alongside the cart to keep drawing. In fact, any of us who went to architecture school have had similar experiences. But it's the term charrette has been coined over the last 25 or 30 years as a very intense, focused design process. And in our case, it's a very public process as well. We've been doing these charrettes for over 20 years, and I think we've done nearly 100 of them at this point throughout the region. It really is an opportunity to involve everyone, and it's not just a question and answer period or taking down notes, but it's an opportunity to get people to get in and draw and put their ideas in. And, from a planning perspective, I think that part of the goal, too, is to advance our planning from sort of the bubble diagram, generic housing here, office there, into something that's more discrete and more defined, so that you can actually start to see specific interventions. This is what we did for the Cultural Arts Village. We did a plan where you can see where the existing buildings are, and you can see where the new interventions might go. And when you do that, you can actually come in and start to count street trees or get a sense of the linear feet of sidewalk that are needed to complete the sidewalk network. It's really taking planning and architecture and blending it together with that level of detail. And then, of course, the imagery is very important as well. With every project, we like to have as many renderings as we can that are consistent with the character of the place that we're working. So we got scolded last Friday night a little bit, because even though we did some beautiful drawings, we were told that there was no interest in any Mediterranean revival architecture, and that we are what did they tell me? French Caribbean town. So, okay. Which is fine. It's important to capture the character, because you want to make sure that, these become important marketing tools for the village and for the town. And then these days with technology, we've even gotten some really smart people who help us do some of the before and after computer renderings. This is an image in downtown West Palm, just south of downtown West Palm Beach. We're working there now. This is US 1. It's funny, because in the last 2 years, many communities have come to us and said, look, our US 1 is too big. We got to reduce the number of lanes. And this is something that's caught on a lot recently. So working with the city of West Palm Beach, this is 4 lanes in each direction. So the idea here is to show what would that transformation look like if you were to go to 3 lanes and then gain space for wider sidewalks and street trees and on-street parking and all of that. This type of work is very, very surgical, of course. It's almost on a block-by-block basis, because you're dealing with existing conditions, you're dealing with existing buildings, existing driveways, so... But I think it's very important work, because, to be able to transform... This is, if you know West Palm Beach, this is the historic Woodlawn Cemetery, which is there just south of downtown, and to be able to give it a more dignified face, provide shade for pedestrians. And this center turn lane is really one of the drivers because, there's no turn lane today. Providing that could drop the number of accidents by over 30% on the corridor. So the renderings are also very important. So it's a balance of things. It's a plan. It's economic development, input, as well as including the community. So, there's lots of benefits. I won't read all this to you, but we often like to say that one of the greatest incentives that anybody could provide to, or that a city could provide to a developer, isn't necessarily cash or on-street parking or whatever it might be, zoning changes. It's really predictability. And predictability is so important, not for the investors in the development community, but it's very important for citizens, because you want your citizenry to feel comfortable that the types of projects that are coming into their city, that are going to be their neighbors ultimately, are consistent with the vision of the community. And that's real important. And it's real important for investors, too, because nobody wants to be in a protracted legal battle for years over a potential development, which, by the way, happens all of the time. So I'll quickly go through this. There's a number of phases in this. This is the exact process we followed with the Cultural Council. We like to start with a host committee. In the case of the Vero Beach Cultural Arts Village, the Cultural Council, Barbara Hoffman established a leadership team that had been together long before we got involved. And they served as the host committee. And the host committee, they've got really three primary roles. One is that they help the charrette team with logistics, like where are we going to have our team stay and what's going to be the studio space. They help us with advertising and outreach, and they are the tentacles, if you will, into the community to get people involved. So they're real important. And they also serve, in this case, with the Cultural Arts Village, they've served as an advisory role in reviewing our draft report. We hold, prior to the actual charrette itself, we have a stakeholder interview process. We kick off the charrette with an opening presentation. And actually, I think the next slide may lay this out a bit better.
Who are the
Actually, I'm sorry.
stakeholders?
Stakeholders?
Who are they?
That's a very good question. Actually, that's the third thing that the host committee helps us with, is the quote-unquote stakeholders. When we establish a host committee and we're putting together the list of folks that we need to interview, we ask the host committee to provide names for us. So they can be residents, they're elected officials, they're key staff members with the city or with the village. They are business owners. We tried to have as wide a spectrum of individuals as possible. Certainly those that may be skeptical of the process, we definitely like to talk to them. We try to include as many people as possible. I'll tell you, with the Cultural Arts Village, I think we interviewed nearly 50 people, had individual interviews. We start with an opening presentation during the week of the charrette, which sort of encapsulates all of the issues. The charrette itself, the charrette week, and that's what a number of these are here. What we do is we establish a studio on site, an office, a temporary office where our team works for the course of the week. So a few months prior to the actual charrette, we established the host committee, and the host committee assists us with finding the charrette studio and a lot of logistical issues. And ultimately, the goal really is that this stakeholder or citizen group becomes champions of the plan. That's the ideal scenario, is that they've lived the process with us over the course of 4 or 6 months. Because there's a few months of just background work that happens before the actual charrette itself occurs. The interview process is very important. As I said, like in North Palm Beach just now, we conducted nearly 60 individual interviews. And number one, it's good for us because it's reconnaissance. We learn a lot about the place from talking to individuals. It's also an opportunity for us to answer questions, and demystify the process, if you will. So we've been doing these week-long charrettes for, like I said, a couple of decades. And there's a reason why we do that. Actually, there's a number of reasons. Number one is that, it's an opportunity for us to keep the doors open for the community to be engaged. When we were working with the Cultural Council, our studio was at the Hampton Inn, the new Hampton Inn. And we probably had 15 to 20, 25 people per day that just sort of strolled through the studio, which was great because we could have little side chats. We could show them what was going on. People would bring us old drawings or documents that we can incorporate into the plan. It's just a continuing educational experience. So the week-long charrette itself starts on day one with this intense public design session. That's typically a Saturday morning. And that goes from Saturday to, about from 9 to about 3 in the morning. And that's where we ask people to work at tables with us. The next 6 days, we are in the open studio, or this on-site location where we're developing the plan. And as I said, that's open to the public, and we encourage people to come by. And then finally, at the end of the charrette week, which would be a Friday evening, we present our work in progress. I believe Michael Bush had provided some correspondence with you. Our work in progress presentation for North Palm Beach was just last Friday. And we're going to be presenting that to our council in a much abbreviated form on the 19th at the Regional Planning Council. So typically, the studio space is open from 9 in the morning till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, however long we're there, sometimes even later. And, it doesn't make it easier, of course, to develop the plan with constant questions and people coming in, but it really enriches the whole process. And it enriches the outcome, too. So here's that opening presentation. And then, as I said, on Saturday, we just recently in North Palm, we broke into 12 different tables. We had 160 people that showed up on the Saturday session in North Palm Beach. And it was interesting because there's no real contentious issues there. Oftentimes we've got big numbers like that. It's because there's a big project that everybody's upset about, or you're looking to change from one utility provider to another, or there's a big contentious issue and people are upset. In the case of North Palm last week, there wasn't. People showed up because they care about their community. We encourage that children participate too. Sometimes we forget their perspective. They don't drive, and they're getting around on bikes or skateboards, and they have to deal with some of the traffic situations and road conditions that we've created. And they remind us, I think, of sometimes how out of balance we are. During that Saturday session, we have lunch brought in, and we ask that a member of each of the tables that's working present their ideas back to the group, back to the whole community. And that's great. That's a great opportunity because neighbors will then see their neighbors start to present ideas that they share too. And so it's really a sense of building authorship for the effort. As I said, then we have established a studio somewhere. It was at the Hampton Inn for the Arts Village. And that's just basically where we work, morning, noon, and night. And try to develop as much of the plan in the course of that week as possible. Understanding that that's not the end, but it really gives us this process. What's so great about it is that we bring in a team of 10 to 12 professionals that are economists, architects, engineers, etc. And to try to do something remotely, you're bouncing emails back and forth, and it just seems to take a lot longer. We can get the team to focus intensely on a single project for 7 straight days, and we're able to produce a lot of work. And then that gives us a real jump start to developing the master plan. And then at the end of that week, we come back and present, how do we do? This is what we heard on Saturday, in our opening presentation and our workshop. And then we present, what we've developed over the course of the week. And that was the presentation we had last Friday for North Palm Beach. As I said, an important part of the team, I must say, is the local staff. I can say here, when we worked on the Cultural Arts Village, Tim McGarry was very helpful in providing us information. Certainly Tammy and Rita were very helpful. We did all the interviews here in this building, so it becomes a real team effort. And we can become a real pain, unfortunately, not intentionally, but to staff sometimes, because, it is an intense, focused effort, and there's, a lot of hands on deck. After the charrette process itself, like, for instance, in North Palm Beach, 10 to 12 weeks from now, we'll come back with a plan, a draft plan, that will not only lay out the exhibits and interventions that we designed during the charrette, but, like, for instance, we've got a lot of analysis that we still need to conduct in North Palm Beach that we simply ran out of time for. One of those would be, the conversion of some existing office and retail space into housing, into one particular shopping center that it's not ready to be knocked down, but it's very odd and not functioning on all cylinders. So we're going to explore architecturally, is it feasible to try to convert that building into other uses? We're also going to look at very detailed zoning analysis we're doing down there. So we continue working and then come back in a couple of months with draft recommendations and a draft plan. And that's kind of where we are right now with the Cultural Arts Village. We've been meeting with the leadership team. We've gone through a couple draft report reviews, and we're actually presenting next Wednesday at the Heritage Center an update on where we are. And then oftentimes we'll come back. I say final presentation here. Again, sorry, I don't know why it's cut off, but final presentation. But honestly, I was counting on the way up here. I think this, for the Cultural Arts Village, this doesn't really count today, but I think we've been up here, 20, 30 times since August. For the Cultural Arts Village, making presentations to neighborhoods, to minor groups, larger groups. So one of the benefits, I think, and one of the reasons why I love my job is that at the Regional Planning Council, being the planning council for this area, we don't ever go away. We're always there to provide assistance and, to help any project marshal through. We'll be asked, for instance, the city of Lake Worth to come down and make a presentation about a charrette we did in 2008. And we're happy to do that, as part of our role as the Regional Planning Council, because, our ultimate mission as the Regional Planning Council is to help, our region prosper and grow in a way that, communities are proud of.
Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Who are you guys?
Who are what?
You
The
guys.
Regional Planning Council?
Yeah. When I think of councils, I think of like the Veterans Council or the Cultural Council, and those are volunteers.
Okay.
And I have a feeling this isn't free.
Oh, no, this is not free. The Regional Planning Council is one of now 10. The state, back in the early days of growth management, was carved up into 11 different regions. And up until, I want to say 4 years ago, we had partial funding from the state of Florida. Growth management laws have changed quite a bit in the last few years, but we had a number of growth management responsibilities, reviewing developments of regional impact. We're a public agency. We are primarily funded by a per capita fee for the counties within our region, not the municipalities, but the counties. And projects that we work on also assist in our funding. So we have a regional ecologist. We do regional brownfield assessment. In fact, we've been working with the city of Fort Pierce for a number of years on the H.D. King power plant. Is that correct? Right. And their assessment. So we work with the State Department of Law Enforcement and regional evacuation in terms of hurricane evacuation, et cetera. So I don't know if that answers your question. And one component of what we do is is planning efforts for local governments.
Will there be a Q&A time when you're done?
Of course. Oh, yes.
Okay.
I think also you should point out that we have a representative on the Regional Planning Council. Randy Oates
That's correct.
is a representative on the Regional Planning Council.
That's correct. Actually, if I could, our board, we have a 28-member board. A third of our board are elected officials, county and municipal elected officials. A third of the board are gubernatorial appointees, and a third are ex officios. So we've got county commissioners, local city commissioners, and council members like Mr. Old, and then we've got agency representatives from the
And those people are volunteers?
The board members are, yes. Yes, but my job, my paying job, is with the Regional Planning Council. And
So how many of Yoon's guys are going to be here? How many of Yoon's guys are we going to pay for?
of the Regional Planning Council?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the way that we're structured is that we don't keep, like this team of 10 or 12 members that I mentioned, actually none of them really, most of them are not full-time staff. We've been working long enough to have built relationships with folks all over the state and the country, really. And so we're able to assemble a team with enough notice. We're able to assemble a team tailored to whatever the needs of the community are. So, for instance, when we worked in the Cultural Arts Village, there wasn't really a need to do a deep economic development analysis or a market, study. So, nor was the budget for that, frankly. But, the team is really made up of a lot of private sector consultants that we have worked with over the years. And I think we've got 2 staff members that were full-time on this last charrette, Kim Delaney and myself.
Okay.
We used to be bigger. We used to have a staff of about 17, and we're down to, I think, 12 now. Anyway, I won't go too much longer. This is just to show. This was, again, for the host committee for the previous project, but, we work closely with the host committee to detail out what the schedule of events is going to be. You see, we had our public workshop on Saturday the 30th, and it just ended last Friday. So we're going to actually be meeting with them probably in the next 2 weeks, again, the host committee, to let them know what the upcoming schedule is going to be. And that's it. So I hope that gives you a good overview. If nothing else, it's a good intro for a question and answer. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
How does projects like ours that are just public property, no private property, it's not like what you just presented in Palm Beach. It's different, and there are definite constraints to our project. And there has to be for recreational use.
Well, every project has a program. Okay, I mean the program, like for instance in North Palm Beach, we didn't know what the program was. The community told us what the program was. The program was to fix US 1. The program was to improve a couple of parks. The program was to do a number of things. And those were ideas that were illuminated and brought up by the community through the process. So whether you're working on public land or private land, I don't know that the process, if that makes a difference. If the goal is to solicit meaningful public input in a transparent planning process,
Within the constraints that you have to live with.
absolutely, within whatever parameters there are. For instance, when we worked in the Cultural Arts Village, I remember a few folks early on saying, "Well, what does this have to do with All Aboard Florida?" And it had nothing to do with All Aboard Florida. In fact, it was really just looking at a neighborhood, and that was the scope of that. So really the scope and the program is what you establish or what you work with the community to establish, understanding, I guess, that there are certain parameters that you have.
I would encourage everyone now to ask whatever questions you have. One of the things that I enjoyed about this, and when we visited, was the very first thing that we did here on our project was to get citizens' input. Mm-hmm. You can't have a successful project without it, and it's pretty much what we got from the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council as well. Citizen input as being the nucleus of the entire project. So that part of it we were very compatible with, and I think found it easy to communicate. I think everybody now should take the time and ask the questions, because there are going to be some recommendations that we're going to make to the City Council. Pretty soon. Go ahead, Bill.
Can I ask you I'm sorry. Okay. When you do the study on all of this, do you take into consideration the impact that it will have to the residential area around?
Absolutely, that's essential. In fact, a lot of these community master plans are driven by exactly that. You know, you've got a commercial corridor or you've got a large redevelopment site, and everybody wants to know what are the impacts going to be. Traffic is usually number one. Visual impact or use impact is important. So that's usually one of the number one, issues. And as you've probably seen over the years, projects that even if they just have the potential for impacting neighborhoods, if there hasn't been the adequate outreach, and by outreach, I don't just mean like having meetings and having people show up and checking boxes, but literally engaging them and having a community's input alter or redirect a plan that's actually better. Now, not all community input's great, right? I mean, some people have some kooky ideas, and so through this process, oftentimes we'll test most of the ideas, and the ones that really make sense and have the greatest benefit, and in fact, live up to solid planning principles, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing, make it on the plan. But impacts are what drives a lot of this. Yes, ma'am.
What is the final product that we're presented with? Is it just an overall scheme of this would be a good idea, this is how it comes together architecturally and design? Anything beyond that? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like if we're interested in a restaurant, do you do any contact with, negotiations and along that line?
So getting into like recruiting businesses or something, that's typically not what we do.
Okay, all right.
Usually what we're helping the community and the city establish policy and a direction for growth. So, for instance, in the Cultural Arts Village, there are some ideas about some uses that the community would really like to see in the Arts Village, like maybe limited lodging, right? Maybe a bed and breakfast or something like that. Or some other things that have come up, which are illegal in the code today. So one of the things that we're recommending is certain specific modifications to the code that would enable that. So we provide, when you develop one of these plans, there's literally dozens of projects, potential projects, of varying scales and varying priorities. What we will do is identify those projects, help prioritize them, and identify who needs to be doing what, right? Because some of the work needs to be done by the city or a village or whoever. A lot of it is just setting the table, if you will, for the private sector and letting them know that, this is what we want and we encourage you to come in. We want you to build in our community, but it needs to look like this. And so also we help find ways to provide leverage to the local government. I mentioned earlier in North Palm Beach, their code is a mess. Don't quote me on that, but I've already been quoted on that. But I told the village manager, I said, look, here's the bad news is your zoning code is a mess. I said, the good news is your zoning code is a mess, because that gives you some leverage to identify where you want to go with your regulations and then use that gap, right? Use that direction as leverage to get people to come in and do what you want. For instance, right now in US 1, in the village in North Palm Beach, they're required to have a 100-foot setback for every building that comes in. Well, that kills your parcel for redevelopment. So one strategy is to say, well, listen, for the next couple years, we're going to establish a limited duration zoning whatever. And we'll relieve that setback if you build per, these recommendations. So there's all kinds of little tricks, but the idea is to use some of your zoning as leverage, you know what I mean? So getting back to your specific question, we don't do business recruitment, we won't do building, we'll do schematic and conceptual building designs, but really what we do is we set the place for the private sector to come in and start to implement your plan.
So we have a script essentially to follow.
Very good, yes,
Okay.
exactly. And some policy.
Okay, all right.
Well, excuse me, you go way beyond that too, because you basically come in and clean up, I think, what the permit requirements are, and actually seek some of those, is my understanding.
And you know, the scope is, I mean, the scope can be modified. Like, for instance, we're actually doing some of the initial engineering for some of these US 1 conversions. And if that's a piece of the scope that's desired, I don't think that applies here, but you know, that's something that's identified early on. And then we're also going after funding sources for that as well. So the scope can really be whatever, it can be tailored to whatever it is that the community wants. And if it's outside of our capability or the capability of our team, you know, or it just maybe is not, we would never get into a position of wanting to do, say, you know, detailed site plans for approval, because that becomes a contradiction. You know, we don't want to be in a conflict sort of situation. But you are right.
You're setting up a developer-ready situation,
Yes.
site plan-wise.
Definitely giving direction for what is an acceptable development. Yes.
You see, my understanding of what happens is, like when a design firm finishes, then city council will come back and do a RFQ, RFP for a developer, you know, to bid on, you know, coming in with what their conceptual design has been, you know, from all the charrettes. Mm-hmm. The other plus you talked about the money is they are familiar with the grant availability in this area, whereas most other people are not. So, you know, it's a real plus.
Dick, who are you expecting from the public side? We know he's going to interview all the officials, but from the public side, are you expecting different people to come to these charrettes than came to our meetings?
Definitely, yeah, because it's advertised, you know. They want as many people to come as possible.
We advertise too, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but there will be more interest because this is moving more to action than where we are, you know, from what we've done. Let me point out some other things that we learned when we were down there was especially their involvement with the DOT, because we have a DOT issue because of Indian River Boulevard, you know, and Amelie Bridge. And, you know, how do you get access back and forth between the two parcels or three parcels of land? And they came up with an idea when we were down there, which I don't know if you remember it, Dana, of going under the bridge?
Yes.
Okay, that they can put a walkway or a small roadway under the bridge between the water treatment plant and the power plant. I mean, they were working right away when we were down there talking with them.
Now, that hasn't been tested yet, so, you know, we don't know if that actually works.
Well, I'm publicizing it right now.
It's a done deal.
I noticed that, yes. You mentioned the public that would be involved. Just as an example, when on September 12th we had the kickoff for the week-long charrette for the Cultural Arts Village, we had over 80 people that showed up and spent the day, the morning and into the afternoon with us at the Heritage Center. And there they developed, I think, 6 or 8 different plans. And as I said, we had, I don't know, nearly 100 people come through the studio during the week, and then we had another 80 to 100 people at the Friday presentation. So there was that in addition to everybody that was interviewed. I mean, hats off to Barbara Hoffman and her team. They just were great in getting the word out. So, you know, I think that it's not without some work, but you know, part of having that team is that they get their neighbors and their friends and their, you know, constituents to come to this effort.
Well, do you do the advertising for the charrette, or is that up to us to do?
Well, it's I'll tell you, we create the flyers and we work with the host committee to wordsmith them or get the images right or whatever. I'll tell you, these days it's gotten a lot easier. I mean, I remember the days of like door hangers and mailers and all of this, but email has made it a lot easier. Facebook is actually very useful in that. So whatever social media, we can do whatever works best. I know the local papers here are very popular, so there are advertisements in the local papers. We will do that, and we'll work with the city on that. But any media that seems to work. That's because it changes from place to place. We would utilize.
How much do we expect this is going to cost?
The million-dollar question. Hope not, right? I can tell you, we don't have a scope yet, so I can tell you that the effort that we did, that we're just wrapping up the charrette for in North Palm Beach, was $240,000. Now, that has a full economic development analysis. It has the engineering services for doing all the transportation modeling for the lane elimination. And there's another piece of that I'm forgetting about. But there was another discrete, the retail consulting component of that. That effort was, I think that there was a $50,000 contribution from the Metropolitan Planning Organization. I think that's the amount. I don't have it in front of me. So, there are different agencies that can participate. It really depends upon the scope. But I'm putting that out as a big number. And then we can work back from there, depending upon what the elements of the scope are. Yes, sir.
So to come to whatever that number would be, that's derived from the charrette meetings with the public and input from the various councils, and then you see what the scope of the project is going to be based on that input, and then you come up with what the top number will be?
Kind of, sort of. The input from the public is more about the plan and the planning effort, not really about what the scope of the project would be. I think the scope of the project, I can't tell you right off the top of my head how many acres this is, what are the elements of it, what are we looking at doing, is there a market study that's needed, is there engineering that's needed. That would really come from this group and the city council, I think. And working with your staff, working with your legal department, et cetera, what the actual scope is. And then we can provide, what different scopes were in different areas, but that takes a couple few months really to get through that, to make sure that we've got, that we're all on the same page. Because the last thing we want to do is everybody get excited about a project and find out later that, we missed a piece of it or something. So
how do you see this working, Dick? Are you going to put out an RFQ for planning council?
Am I? No. Is city council?
Is somebody going to?
It's city council here.
Are these guys the only ones in
Jim's
the
going
world?
to tell you how it's going to run.
There's the boss.
Hi.
Sue, if we go out with an RFP, the Regional Planning Council cannot participate in that type of activity. We would employ them because we are members of that organization. The Regional Planning Council would go out and try to find, for example, what he talked about in North Palm Beach, where they were able to get the MPO to contribute to, which if you went out with an RFP, you were not going to get that service. So you have an option here of going with the Regional Planning Council or going with an RFP. And so it's not that you can combine the two.
I think we're adding one different level in here too, because RFP, RFQ does become involved if you employ these people.
I was talking about before that, though, about how we come to the decision to use them versus anything else.
So council would do that decision.
Well,
What are the else's?
Well, the else's are, which is what I think Jim was getting ready to talk about, was
I am correct in that. That's correct.
you can either bring these people under contract or you can do an RFP, RFQ, and have quotes from other design teams, private design teams, and or private developers to come in and do it.
Sue, the way we were looking at it, they are familiar with the community. They did the one for the Arts Council and was very successful. And the way that they motivated and helped motivate Barbara and her team to put that off was something they, in my opinion, got results that brought the community together. And so that's something we were looking at. I have not seen, in my experience, hiring a private firm to do that. A private firm relies more on the city. You asked a question earlier, who are going to be in the charrettes and who are you going to interview? Is it just going to be the officials in this building? I think the officials in this building are looking for input from the community, not from input from the officials of this
Yeah,
community.
no, that's not what I said. I said, I understand you're going to interview
Yeah.
the people in this building. My question was, are there going to be members of the public being interviewed that are different from those people that came to the 3 meetings we had here?
And the answer to the question is we're sure, but the driving force is not going to be the folks in this building. It's going to be
Right.
whoever the community group is that drives it. And again, if we're going to set it up as a Cultural Arts Council, and again, to me, that was one of the more successful efforts that have been put forth. But as was indicated, that takes some work from whoever that core group. They're going to have to devote the time and effort to go through the exercise and answer questions. And in my opinion, should not be city officials, because if you want city officials to do it, we'll just use our planning department and come out with a plan, and that's the way it is. And we're looking more for the inclusion of ideas from the community. The people who have attended this are not the same people who attended, for example, the chamber functions. The chamber had the same type of business table and took on the ideas. We're hoping we'll get the meshing of both of those. That would be my goal, is to try to get the meshing of both of those.
So the going in premise, though, is going to be that we are going to live within the constraints that it's to be used for recreational purposes?
Well, that is a constraint, but you can change that constraint. If the community comes out and says, we want something there, and we'll go to a referendum to change the charter, if it's that overwhelming, you have the constraints, and we have to recognize those and understand the nature of what those are. But at the same time, the only thing that's a constraint that you can't change is you've got waterfront. You can't make it a highway on the other,
Yeah,
on the
for
west,
sure.
on the east side of the thing. So, but the answer to the question is, if we think as a community that's a constraint too overwhelming to overcome, then that is a real constraint that says we need to limit what our scope is. But again, I think that's a community decision, not a city council or a city administration decision.
Whenever we talk about protecting public land, that's what we always say. We'll put it in the charter and then it's protected. But now it's protected until somebody comes up with a better idea and they get a referendum.
Well, but if you're right, what you're saying, and if that is a community value, that once it's in the charter, we never do anything else, then that's a constraint that's on this land. But we as a community have to decide that. But everything in the charter, there have been many items in the charter changed over time. So when it's in the charter, you're right, you have to go the extra mile, but things in the charter have changed. And so, but again, if the constraint is so valuable to us as a community, then that is a constraint we put on this planning process. And if you pull together a whole wide varying degree of community people on this task force who's going to drive the process, and they say, I don't want to hear anything that talks about something other than recreation and cultural, then that's the process that'll be driven. But that still, the elements are critical that have to be addressed. How are we going to resolve what is perceived as the major traffic problems at 17
Sure.
and Indian River Boulevard? We've got to do it. The other thing that has no constraint, and it's the third partial of this, is the old postal annex. I don't think, take this back, it's not what I think that counts, but putting a big gas station there and trying to put in a park and recreation on the other side may or may not be something that you want. But I could use office complex. Do we want an office complex there and recreation on the other side? And those are the type of discussions and conversations that will have to take place in the charrette. But, again, we, the community, are going to establish what are the parameters. We may say that we want things to just be grass. So be it. And
Let me see if there are any more questions for Mr. Little, so he can be heading home.
I have one. My question is just a simple one. When you do these individual interviews, and especially with your municipalities, who usually chooses those people to be interviewed?
That's a
Is
great
it
question.
through your council members? Is it through who does that usually come from?
So typically what will happen is that the council or the manager will establish work with us to establish the host committee, right? 8, 7, 10 people, something like that. And then we'll usually solicit them for 5 to 6, maybe 10 names each of who we should interview. Oftentimes there will be some overlap. And we provide a list beforehand just to give a sense of the spectrum of individuals that we're looking for. We want to hear from, local clergy. We want to hear from, local business owners, longtime residents. By default, we'll interview the elected officials and key staff members and police, fire if necessary. Depending upon the scope, but we really leave that because we don't know. I wouldn't know who to call, so we leave that up to the group to tell us who we need to call, and that list, may be similar or maybe very different from what we had in the Cultural Arts Village. It's a different context. It's a different project. By the way, just as in terms of scale is an important piece of the scope, right? This North Palm Beach project. That's almost 5.5 square miles. It's a big area. It's an entire municipal village that we were looking at. We're talking about 1 or 2 parcels here, and they're sizable, and they're very valuable, important pieces to the community. But just in terms of scale, that's something that obviously we would be taking into consideration as well. And if I may, thank you, Mr. Connor. He's absolutely right. We are a public agency. We do not compete with the private sector. We work at the whim of our local government. So we go where we're asked to go. So you're absolutely right. The other, we enter into interlocal agreements through our statutory position with the state, with local governments. But this is a conversation that's had often. You would certainly have the option to go out to an RFP or an RFQ for private firms. And, there's a number of great firms out there that could do this, do a project for you. I would only say just that we do have a very specialized role with our local governments just in terms of the public process. That's something that's we hold dear, the process, because it has been very successful over the years. And plans that have been developed through that very public process tend to endure, which is an important thing as well. So, and really that's going to be a decision that you and the council need to make.
Let me ask you a question. From when you start the charrette week, you present an initial layout, design, whatever you want to call, okay? How much does that change by the time you get to the end of the week?
End of the week. That's a good question. When we kick off the week on a Saturday morning at 9:30, and we have our opening presentation, we don't present a design. We don't know enough to have designed anything at that point. We've learned a lot, but we haven't really gotten the community to sit down and sketch out for us what they want. What we present are a lot of the things that we've learned through the interview process, which are candid, by the way. We're not saying, well, Mr. Yim said this. We're doing reconnaissance and getting a sense of the DNA of the area and what the expectations are. We also lay out a series of observations. You've got a big road. You've got a big cleanup job potentially ahead of you. You've got potentially a need for waterfront uses that it may be recreation or it may be limited, shopping or restaurants or whatever the observations are. And we just sort of set that up. We tee that up for the community to think about, and then we get to work. So what happens is that on that Saturday, again, using the Cultural Village as an example, I think we had 8 different plans. We had 8 different tables, 80 people working at, 10 different tables or whatever. And the following, the community's putting their ideas down, they're presenting them to us. We're starting to see a thread of consensus among some of the ideas. And then immediately starting Sunday, we start to create a sort of a punch list of all the key items that need to be tested or designed or analyzed as part of the plan. So one example that we heard on the Saturday for the Cultural Arts Village is just the power of the local tree canopy. So that was a no-brainer. One of the first things we did was actually do a detailed computer drawing identifying the tree canopy from high-resolution aerials, because we want to make sure that if redevelopment comes into some of these sites that has some signature trees, that it's understood that there may need to be some, accommodations made to preserve the canopy. So that program or the design it evolves over the course of the week. And I tell you, we presented on Friday, as I said, the plan that we presented on Friday is going to change again. The plan for the cultural arts village is still evolving. And, the city's never done. It's never complete. So,
yeah, I think that's what's important, though, is people have to understand that it's not locked until probably even the following Friday. The presentation you do on that Friday is not the master plan that will go to council.
That's right.
It probably takes, another month or two before you even come up with your master plan.
And look, I really I'm very proud of the team that we've worked with for, over a decade. Really, really talented folks. And they could come in and I could tell them, look, here's the site, here's the ideas, design it, and they could design it. But, it's really important to get that wouldn't be the community's plan, though, and every place is different. So it's very important that, at least to us, that this process is what it is.
Well, from what we've heard of all the presentations, and we probably have a submission of, 75 different ideas, Tammy, something like that.
Quite a few.
So I think one of the challenges that we would look for in the design process is how do you integrate, those different ideas. And it's understandable that you're not going to put all of them on one piece of property, like the power plant property. In total, all three parcels, we had a little over 40 acres, in total. So I think what we're looking for, my understanding, is the challenge to someone like your group is how do you integrate all this? Where do you integrate it? What are the different phases of it? How will it all follow through? I think that's kind of the process that I understand we're looking for.
Yeah. And distilling those ideas and testing them, even if only to show that they may not make sense on this location, is important. Yes, sir.
Just following up on all of this been said is one thing we really haven't talked about other than the property coming down is the timeline for this. When would the charrettes begin or a charrette begin? And like a neighborhood where, you see a piece of property and it's just all run down, looks terrible. And they think, well, that's not worth anything. And then you clear it and all of a sudden, wow, look what can be done with that. I have a feeling that once that property is cleared, there's going to be a whole new interest and a whole new perspective that people look at that land. So, is there a time frame that's been put forth? Yeah, and that's an open question, not just to you, but every picture we've seen has been with, there's been no cleared property. It's with the power plants, with the water. Yeah, it'll make a big difference when that's all gone.
Right. Mr. O'Connor has some ideas.
The postal annex obviously is ready at any time, so that's a free and clear piece of ground. The other two, the power plant obviously is being dismantled as we speak. We hope to have the tanks out of there and the cooling tower, the big building that's over on the north side, so you have the blue building there and a substation.
Within a year is what I
Within a year, taking down the power plant itself, you have two options there. One is you take everything down and move the substation to a corner of the site or move it somewhere else on 17, which would be even more expensive. That's a decision that has to be made as to what type of land use you put there. The practicalities of the wastewater treatment plant, I think we're talking about 2021, 22. That's when that service will be freed up that we would be able to do something there. So you've got a different time frame on each parcel of ground that you have, but at the same time, I think you have a different type of, even though it's going to be integrated in the type of land use, it's going to be different types of land use on each one of those parcels. And I think you're right. I think once we get the cooling towers down, the tanks down in the back, get those retention areas underneath leveled out and grassed. And if we can get that big white building off of the north side, hopefully that will occur as well. It's going to give us a total different visual of that parcel of ground.
A lot of new inspiration will come from that, too.
I think so, too. The wastewater treatment plant, on the other hand, I think the future land use is now being sort of worked on in a recreational area that, you know, people are starting to invest in there. Other than, I'm almost saying, other than Tim and Gary, it's almost secondary as a wastewater treatment site, or wastewater treatment site, and more of a recreational site now, which I would have never believed that would have ever occurred. But I am reminded by at least one young lady that's in the rowing that it is a sewer plant and not a wastewater treatment plant.
They have to run around it. They smell it all the time. Yeah.
She made it very clear. But again, that's a type, and those are the type of considerations that will have to be taken in under discussion as we look at those parcels and what we do. But there's no question, you take a green piece of ground and look at it, you get a totally different vision than if you have something that's standing there and you say you have to remove it. And
so these charrettes or RFPs, whatever we end up doing, this would be after we'd start that process after the land's cleared.
Correct. What we're trying to do from the city standpoint is get input. These are three, in our opinion, very important parcels of ground. And it would be a way of getting the community's input. What do you see as vision? Because everybody talks about, and there's been a lot of speculation. You know, people thinking, oh, we're going to put a high-rise casino in there or something. Well, first of all, you can't get high-rise in Vero Beach anyway, although you can change the charter. That may be a lot harder than using the recreational land. But so it is one of those that we're looking for that input. And I think what we heard, this is not an end game here once we get those parcels out, but there's going to be a lot of pressure to do something with the postal annex property. There already is. And we just want to make sure that when we do something there that it reflects what is going to happen on the others.
I just want to make sure there's a sense of expectation from the community. We have a gentleman here that has proposed an idea. It's a great idea, but once the land gets cleared, and a charrette occurs, you know, it may be a completely, so people are kind of queuing up for something that may not turn out the way. I just don't want to create too much expectation now before we really.
And I agree with that. You know, everybody needs to look at the definition of plan. Plan means something that this would be our vision, but a vision that can change. And so this is not going to be hard and fast that you're going to have a restaurant there or you're going to have a bowling alley there. It's going to be something that can change over time. But you're right. But it is at least the start of the community going. And it may be 3 or 4 years from now we call them back up and say, hey, wait a minute. We're starting to get different input into this ground. We've already developed the postal annex. Now what do we do? And they may have to come and help us do charrettes and address it again. And so it's really a way of just keeping the community involved in 3 pieces of ground that the city actually owns. So.
Well, I guarantee you, once the city gets the notion that it might perhaps be used for something besides recreation and culture, you'll have a whole different group of people coming to the charrette than you had coming to the meetings we had here.
Oh, and there's no question. And that word, it will get out. I mean, once you start having the charrettes and, you know, you could have people that came in. I mean, the fact that somebody proposed a casino, we did get a couple of calls on that, you know, and you try to explain that unless you're an Indian reservation, that's not going to happen. But the mere fact that somebody says it in a public meeting, and so it does get out, and it is a point of discussion, but it needs to be aired because whoever came up with the idea really firmly felt that that's something that could happen. And we need to explain to people there are limitations just by natural law.
I think people need to understand going through this charrette process, even though, you know, he talked about it being a week, it actually takes somewhere between 4 to 6 months for all of it, I think, right? Would that be reasonable?
Yes. And it also takes time for the development. The Arts Village, the concept of the Arts Village still has to go through, we have to make an amendment to our comprehensive plan. We have to do a zoning overlay for that. Bradenton, who actually has an art village, they're on like their 14th or 15th overlay. And they've been making changes for the last 20 years on theirs because they were trying to accommodate changes that were taking place. The concept is still there, but I'm not sure that what is taking place in Bradenton is actually the vision that people had 15 or 20 years ago.
Hey, let me ask one last chance for questions from Mr. Little. He's going to miss rush hour if he doesn't hurry. I think, where do you go? Back to West Palm, Stuart?
Back to West Palm, yes.
All right. Anybody have any more questions? All right, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. You want to take a quick break for like 5 minutes, and then we go into a discussion of recommendation here to council. All right? Or do you just want to go into it?
I think we're all ready to go.
Yeah.
All right. We were asked to provide a summary of the workshops, and the process, which we took the liberty of writing that up, as well as, and this is from council, they wanted suggestions on going forward, what we would suggest. And Tom and I thought it would be wise, to bring Dana up here to explain really the design process as an education thing. And, if you like him or if you like what he said, that's fine. That's part of the recommendation. And so we took the liberty of writing up a suggestion of both a summary and recommendation. And Tammy has it. We're going to pass it out now. We didn't want to pass it out before because we didn't want to, try to influence, your thinking. I would hope you would all understand that. It's pretty, try to keep it pretty simple, straight to the point, and take a couple of minutes to read it. It's like, 3 or 4 pages. And what it is the first part's the kind of the background of what council requested of us, and the chronological order of how it came together. And then there's, I think, 2 pages of the suggestions that we had from the public, and then there's a page of recommendation, which is it's some of what this discussion was, and that's good because we covered most of what we envisioned would be spoken about. And what will happen is this will go forward to council, and as what's printed across it, it's a draft, so all changes anybody wants to suggest are wide open for them. But this will go to council on their meeting on the 16th, meeting at 6 o'clock, which is next Tuesday. So you want to add anything?
Well, the only thing I'd add is independently, the Chamber of Commerce put together a team and met several times and came up with a very similar recommendation, meaning the Regional Planning Council. If you look at this, and most of you probably have a copy of it, it's similar. There's a few things that are different, but it's very similar to some of the ideas that were expressed here over the 2 or 3 workshops that we had, and the final same recommendation. So it's interesting. We did not communicate with them prior to making this.
Well, where's your recommendation on this, Dick? What is it you're asking us to consider?
Actually, there's one sentence that's above the bottom of the first page. It says a list of usage suggestions by workshop. If you look at that sentence right above it,
Yeah.
it's a very simple, straight to the point recommendation. Which is motion by both commissions.
It's asking for a motion.
Yeah, motion by both commissions for the City Council to select the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council as a professional planner to design a master plan for all 3 properties. And it has back here what you were asking about, Sue, earlier. You know, council's going to make a decision on whether they want to go and hire the Treasure Coast Planning Council, which is the non-RFQ, or if they decide to go RFQ and hire private planners or engineering firms. You know, those are listed as options down there. So, any questions? Actually, Mr. O'Connor could probably answer more for council than we can on what their desires are. Yes, ma'am.
Are you looking for a motion to hire or to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's what that sentence is.
And did I understand that you were saying that the Chamber of Commerce came up with a similar plan?
In their
I didn't
write-up.
think so.
In their write-up, they did, yeah. They don't have a motion. They're obviously not part of the commissions, but after discussing it amongst themselves, they came up with a very similar solution.
Yeah, to consider the Regional Planning Council.
Okay, all right, good.
But they didn't have the presentation that we just had.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
That was good.
Because we wanted to bring them up at least to give an idea of how it works, you know, not necessarily hiring them. You know, a very valuable part of a design team is that in this era, what people use are the charrettes. So you get better, more specific public input than what we had. You know, that people can come in and be more specific about their proposals.
So do you need a motion from one of us?
Well, wait. So what about the funding for the charrette process? Do we have that?
The answer is no, we don't have it in a line item of the budget, but at the same time, we don't know what the number is because we don't know what the scope is going to be. I think what you all are doing here, if this passes through both commissions, making a recommendation that we engage the Regional Planning Council. The recommendation is going to be predicated, from at least administration standpoint, as to can we afford it and we will come up with the scope of the work.
Yeah, well, that's what I was trying to get at all along. I don't have any idea what he costs. You know, how many of him there are, how long the process lasts, what's it going to cost.
He gave you
$250,000.
He gave you a very, very high number. He also gave you a number that included the entire city. We've got 3 partials.
Yeah, he said
The entire city.
Of North Palm.
Oh, North Palm Beach.
Yeah, they did 7 miles.
Sure.
So
He said.
his was a totally different scope, but that's an example that the recent example that he could give you.
I don't think you could quote it now, not to.
No,
he
he
can't.
doesn't have
He can't know what the scope
to.
is.
No.
Yeah.
What direction we're going here.
Yeah, and for example, I'm not sure how much of an in-depth economic analysis we need. From the city standpoint, we're more concerned about getting the citizen input as to potential uses and what can be done for those potential uses to address the traffic issues that are perceived to be very substantial at that intersection. So we have to have that. And the practicalities of ingress and egress off of primarily Indian River Boulevard. So we're looking for more planning documents than in the case, we don't need to know that if we reduce the setbacks, we can have more land use in the downtown area and that kind of stuff. So ours is going to be a little more simple, but it will cost something because we do, from the city's perspective, to make this thing successful, you got to give enough time to get enough input for citizen involvement. And part of that citizen involvement is going to be driven by whoever sits on this committee to get it started.
For sure. Well, so you guys are. So this will go to council. Let's say we made the recommendation today to go with this group. This is going to go to city council. City council will nod their head. You're going to have budget talks starting pretty soon, so you'll put it in the budget to begin this process, and then
either that or we identify monies in the existing budget that will get us, because this is going to be probably 2 budget years going forward. And so you sort of pace the...
Because it's currently slated to be recreational or cultural, it's not going to come out of our budget, is it?
Oh, no.
No.
The recreation department is not, they can't afford it.
Well, right. That's my point.
And nor can the Marine Commission afford it. So, no, I'm talking to two very poor organizations here, so I don't think we're going to have to worry about it coming out of your.
That's a good idea, though, Rob. We should consider.
I'll put that on my list.
Now, if we go and vote for this, does that mean this process starts all over again with the public doing input, or do they take these suggestions?
No, they're going to start all over.
No, it's a combination.
It's a combination of the two. They're going to take this as background from the community. And then
this list of suggestions is where they will start.
Okay.
And then they go and interview, additional people.
This is evidence that the community's been involved up to this point.
Yeah, essentially,
They're not starting
as advisory commissions, we were asked by the city council to get citizen input and then come up with a recommendation to them as to how to move forward. Our recommendation is here. The city council then determines the best way forward. They have to approve this, obviously. And if the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council is chosen, selected, which we hope it is, then they're going to take the input that's already been received. There's been a lot of effort put into that as their tee-off. And he mentioned the first day they're going to tee it up. They've got 24 items to tee up right there. And they have to then determine which of those are practical, which are going to give the best return for our citizens, and how do you go forward with it. So there's been some work already done. It's just not in any form that you could actually create a design with. And that's where we know we need a professional company to do it.
And what about the vision plan? Is that something that they will consider as well? Because there's a big movement right now afoot to go back and dust it off and update it. And
The answer to the question is yes. It will be a part. They're going to look at any planning document we have, but the vision plan never envisioned doing what we're doing on these three parcels. The Indian River corridor was looked at as a corridor. And so what we're talking about are really taking from that vision plan three parcels of ground and trying to focus in on that. It's sort of like the vision over on the beach. It took in all of Ocean Drive and it didn't take down the individual parcels. But they will have to look at some of that, Sue, going back. And if there are some restrictions, again, using Ocean Drive as one, or you can use 14th Avenue as another one. In there we adopted a whole new zone for 14th Avenue that's a central business district that allows for a lot more flexibility. Ocean Drive, we have parameters, for example, the setbacks of the east side of Ocean Drive versus the west side of Ocean Drive, and then on Cardinal you have some of those things. And they will look at those parameters, but that won't be in concrete. They may come back and say, hey, maybe this needs a central business district zoning classification.
Hey, let me back up a second here. Are there any suggestions or corrections on the commentary before we go to doing a motion? Okay. All right.
well, I make a motion that we recommend the Treasure Coast financial planning. Listen to me. To go
Regional
forward to
Planning
City
Council.
Council. Thank you.
Brian has second. Okay.
Okay.
And we need a vote.
Yeah, we probably need, what do you want, Tammy? Which type of vote?
I think we should do
Roll call?
Okay.
Okay.
Ms. Spears?
Aye.
She wouldn't.
What?
She's an alternate.
She wouldn't have voted.
Right.
I apologize.
Could you state what we're voting on again, please?
The motion.
The motion of selecting the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council.
To go to City Council.
With no cost limitations.
If-
Well, as the professional planner.
If you
Yeah,
don't mind,
it's pretty much as it's written.
could you make the motion just to adopt the recommended draft to submit
Okay.
to council? In there, it talks about the Regional Planning Council.
Okay.
But that way, you're submitting the entire document, and it'll be much easier and clean to deal with, and then that'll be coming from the
Do you
joint.
want me to restate it?
Restate it as what Mr. O'Connor just said.
I make a motion that we send to City Council our document entitled Future Use of City of Vero Beach Power Plant, Wastewater Treatment Plant, and Post Office Annex Land for their consideration in moving forward.
Yeah, it should be dated February 9th. Excuse me for
We need a
adding
second on that? Okay, second. All right.
Yeah, we need to put a date on this.
February 9th.
Yes.
Now
Okay,
for roll
let's
call.
go again.
Mrs. DeNeno?
Yes.
Ms. Jones? She's not here. Mr. Holton?
Yes.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Yem?
Yes. Actually, Ms. Pierce.
She would vote then, yes, because,
Voted.
yes, okay.
Your guys. Now you got to stay up with
Let's see. Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Giuliano?
Yes.
At least we've got a start.
Yes. I agree.
All right, well, thank you. Any comments? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
sir.
have a comment from Jim. Yeah, and you were well underway of dismantling big portions of the property, power plant property. The only thought I had and some other notes, and I think it's going to come later when I can present other stuff that I mentioned yesterday, is that it's already had a phase 1 environmental site assessment.
No, it's just a phase 1.
Right, so what I'm saying is that as you go through this dismantling process, you may want to consider whether you want to embark on phase 2, because there's going to be an opportunity to maybe uncover and do things that would, later on, you were going to have to do anyhow.
No question. If we take up the slab, we'll have to do a phase 2.
Okay, great.
Jim, before you leave, my question for you, for the dismantlement of the plant that has already just begun, what is to be done with any equipment that's still in the building?
We are selling it. We have
Sold?
we have a request for proposals right now. We have about 230,000 gallons of oil in one of the tanks. The other tank is empty. So we are looking for a bid. There's a value to that, but now there's sludge in the bottom, and the sludge cost us money when we did the other tank, so we know. And then we're also, on this particular case, going to have them clean the lines out that go into the power plant. So it's going to be a total. Then we'll do another bid for dismantlement of those tanks. We are being told, even though they're steel, the value to dismantle is going to be higher than the value of the steel. We don't know what that delta will be. And then the generators inside the building, we've talked to 3 or 4 different companies that have overseas connections for at least one of those generators that have value that they can dismantle, send it somewhere else, and use it in another country somewhere. The others, we're not sure what the values will be, but we'll sell those as surplus that they'll have to come in. We have limitations on a lot of that because we've got to watch for the structural integrity of the building. They just can't come in with a big crane and knock the roof off the top or something. And so there's going to be limitations as to how they get that equipment out. And then we also have some equipment that's tied to our substation that is also tied to our generators. For example, we have some battery packs. So they're not going to be able to take all those out. And that's going to be one of those little areas that's going to be a challenge to manage as they do it. But we're hoping that we will have some money out of that. And I'm trying to recall, I think the value of the materials out was something like $800,000 to $900,000 in the initial, but the value for the actual taking the cooling tower down and the tanks were going to exceed, but it was going to be like a delta of $200,000 or $300,000 based on a very preliminary review that they looked at.
Is Big Blue going to be a later project or the last project on that project?
Be the last project. And the reason for that is the estimate cost of taking Big Blue down is somewhere between $7.5 and $9 million.
Yeah,
And that does not include the environmental cleanup. And see, there's going to be very little salvageable in that, although that is estimated to be maybe a couple $100,000, but it's a pretty substantial number. And then if you move the substation, that's another $7 to $8 million if you try to relocate and rebuild a substation somewhere.
Off the property or on the property, does it make a difference?
Even on the property, it's a little cheaper on the property because you've got direct lines that you can tie to your 69. The problem is that all the parts in the substation, very little of that is removable and reusable. Those pretty well go away, and you're really constructing a whole new substation at that point. And the proximity to your transmission lines is the critical part of that whole movement.
Did they determine, somebody had mentioned this in one of the meetings earlier, one of the public hearings, about how much property would be needed to relocate that substation? And they said 4 acres. I kind of looked at it closer, and it's about 0.83 is what that thing sits on, less than an acre.
Well, the key is you would build a substation in, it might have been 4 acres. I know it was in the acre numbers that we did it, and the estimate and what we did is we took an FP&L substation site and what it would require, and you have to have enough movement around the substation for equipment and for movement of your transformers as well as access to the site, and then you have to have your security access from the substation, so it expands. And in that one, that's a very critical substation. It's sort of the hub because you have multiple feeders coming in there.
All right, any other questions?
Thank you.
Anybody want to say anything? Let me just add one thing, Mrs. Pierce, which you guys have, I guess, suggestions, which I think we can add to the list. Right, Tammy, that last page, which I think nobody objects to that. That would be a change to, that motion going forward, or that draft in addition.
Just had to add that to the bottom of that, yeah.
All right, is that it? We're adjourned.
Thank you, too.